Boom, there it is. Okay. Uh, so why did we end up here? We ended up here because we discussed stability. Now, we were going to discuss some of the other laws. So basically, you could see here this cost in political power, and we've sort of swung around political power here and there. Everything here in this area costs political power to change. So here you have a political advisor, the 3 slots of political advisor, and you have certain people to select from. Some of them are grayed out because they are hidden behind a certain focus. You need to meet a certain precondition to have them available to you, and some are just available to you, and all you need to do is pay the political power cost. Now, the political power is up here. Political power is basically something that's like daily mana. You get it. This is the only thing in HOI4 that you get for free. And even this one isn't for free necessarily, because there are ways to influence it to stack both positive and negative modifiers on top of it as well. Now, as you can see here, political power has a base value of 20%. Now, our Führer here, Mr. H, gives you a 25% modifier just because of his personality. So you get a 25% modifier off the base. Stability gives you another 6% modifier off the base, right? And the MIFO bills take out an actual 0.2% per day out of whatever is generated. So the power change is plus 2.43 per day, the effective one. If we didn't have the MIFO bills, it would be 2 plus 63 per day. If we didn't have the stability, it would be something else. You can calculate that yourselves. Now, once you get 150 political power, or in Kalmar Schacht's case, 75 political power, here you can spend it and assign one of these guys. Now, for political power expenditures, you have a few ways to go. The silent workhorse rate is a political power gain modifier. So these guys, if you add them in here, they give you certain bonuses to your faction. In our case, you have 2 silent workhorses, which if you select them both, will give you plus 30% political power gain. It's not really necessary to select them all. Now, what's the point? You have an expenditure into one of them, right? But it gives you plus 15% more political power per day. So basically, these guys end up paying for themselves in time, but in terms of political power. But you're also not getting whatever bonus you would have been getting if you were selecting some other guy. So it's hard to actually put a price on them. But the idea is, as Germany, one of your first expenditures, depending on where you want to go, should be a silent workhorse. Goebbels here is a fascist demagogue, which means it increases your fascism support, which is actually not affected by the ideology drift defense. So basically, he will increase the party popularity by 10 per day. This is scaled based on your actual party popularity, so it's not 0.1 per day. In effectiveness, it's not 0.1 per day, as you see it here. But in the end, it will lead you, it can get you to 100% party popularity, and this gives you much better stability here. You can get extra 6% stability, so you can, just by picking Goebbels and letting time run, you will end up with 90% stability in total, just because your party popularity will go to 100% over time. But one of the other things that is important to have Goebbels, and frankly, I recommend taking Goebbels as the first political power expenditure of Germany, is this plus 10% war support. Why plus 10% war support? Because if you do the national focus, we're going to talk about the national focuses later, but you can, by getting another 10% from Goebbels, you get to 45%, and the very first action that you do in the game will give you another 5% war support, and that will put you at more than 50% war support, giving you the ability to move to war economy very fast, which means you get an extra 10%, an extra 5% reduction in consumer goods factories and an extra 10% military factory construction speed. So overall, you get a 10% bonus to building military factories, and you get more civilian factories available. So this is why Goebbels is essential as one of the first ones. Ernst Thälmann is a communist revolutionary, which he gives you extra daily communism support. This is useful if you want to change ideologies. Why you would do that with the Nazi Germany, I don't know, but maybe you're interested in playthrough. John von Ribbentrop, or whatever the hell his name was, von Ribbentrop, gives you another 5% political power gain and an additional ideology, 15% ideology drift defense, which means if somebody is trying to change our party popularity from outside. And what does that mean? Okay, because I've been saying this a lot, but I haven't really explained it. So you can also use the political power to, for instance, go to Austria, to diplomacy, and you can improve relations by spending 10 political power and then 0.4 political power every day, or you can boost party popularity, and they will get a daily drift of 0.3%. You might think that's a very small daily drift. Yes, it is, but it's still significant, and it's only this small because they're already extremely fascist, right? By spending 0.25 political power per day. And you're a fascist, so you can influence a country to go fascist. Like, for instance, Yugoslavia, if you boost the party popularity, the cost remains the same, 0.25 political power per day, but they will get a much larger daily drift, which is 0.12 per day rather than 0.03. Why? Because their fascist is very small, and like I said, the drift scales in depending on what your party popularity is, which is why I said that if you pick Goebbels here, it won't do a 0.10 or 0.1 daily fascism support, but in effect it will be more like 0.002 more likely per day, because it scales based on what your party popularity is at the end. So this is the daily drift. The ideology drift defense will defend a country against having another country change its party popularity. They can still do it, but it's a political power game, basically. Smooth talking charmer is a guy that you will never pick. It will increase your trade deal opinion factor. So basically what this means is when you're trading with a nation, like Sweden, for instance, so they are exporting 28% of their trade, right? Let's see, where do we go? Here we go. Right. Now, our trade influence with Sweden is 145. That's a base of 3. The distance of the distance is, so the base is 150. The distance affects it negatively. Support for democratic in Sweden affects it positively. Our personal relations with them, which we can see here, is minus 10%, is minus 10. So their opinion of us is minus 10 because we have a different ideology. So so basically these are the modifiers, and then you have their own trade law, which is export focus, which means they get 50% resources to market. So this is their entire capacity for tungsten that goes to export. By knowing that trade law 50%, we can surmise that Sweden has an effective production of tungsten of double 28, which is 56 tungsten. If we were to look, here it is 56 tungsten. Just to double check that. Now, basically, the more trade influence we have, the more. So basically, we might not be the only people interested in trading tungsten with Sweden. There might be others. Now, you don't need to really worry about that so much. There is usually you can trade for whatever you want with a country without getting into a trade war. But it's worth noting that if all of a sudden there's too many people trading with the same nation, you might not be able to get all of the, in this case, 8 tungsten that we're trading for. And in order to boost your trade influence, you can improve opinion with Sweden, right? And that will do some. Or you can put a 10% trade deal opinion factor modifier, which will give you more. You will be more likely to get trade. So we discussed the silent workhorse. We discussed it. Prince of Terror gives you plus 2% non-core manpower. Well, whenever we get to that, that'll be. It will do a minus 30% of foreign subversive activities efficiency. So this is for somebody who wants to stage a coup in your country, or who wants to boost a different ideology. They will have to fight through a minus 30% modifier, and a positive minus 20% modifier of effect of partisans on us, which we will discuss when we get to the partisan part. War Industrialist gives you bonuses for building military factories, dockyards, and fuel silos. Armament Organizer gives you another civilian to military factory conversion cost. Again, we will not discuss that. That's a very niche strategy. Fritz Todd, Fortification Engineer, gives you bonuses for building coastal fort, land forts, and anti-air. As you can see, this guy is locked behind the focus vest wall. Hjalmar Schacht, Captain of Industry, gives you bonuses to building infrastructure, civilian factory, and refinery. If you want to build up a civilian factory, Germany, you need this guy in your team. Also, if you're building refineries, you can get an extra 10% construction modifier on refineries. So Hjalmar Schacht is a good guy to pursue. As you can see, he's cheap, but he is locked behind a focus. We're going to discuss focuses in a minute. Here in research and production, you can change your designers to get basically a research speed bonus and some other various bonuses to your equipment that you research. This is broken up into tanks, ships, aircraft, with all kinds of types of aircraft. We will discuss them later. Material designers, which is broken up into weapons and equipment, artillery, and motorization. This just gives you a straight up research bonus. It doesn't affect it doesn't affect the actual capabilities of it. We will discuss which one to pick later. We have for industrial concern, which is broken up into electronics research speed, industrial research speed bonus, and industrial and synthetics research speed bonus. So we can discuss which one to select. As you can see, they just give you research speed bonus. Then for the theorist, we have rocket scientists with rocket research speed, nuclear scientists with nuclear research speed, Heinz Guderian blitzkrieg theorist. This guy, so you have the military theorists, you have the cheap one and the more expensive one. What the difference is this gives you 10% land doctrine research speed, but it also increases the speed of your units, of your armors in the field, and you get a passive 0.5 daily army experience gain. Army experience, you see it here, it's capped at 500. You also have naval experience and air experience. We'll come back to these later on. Just know that this guy or this guy gives you a 0.5 daily army experience. You can get to use the army experience later on to alter your army composition and to create improved equipment. We will discuss this later. This one gives you an extra 15% research bonus for mobile warfare, while Guderian, being cheaper, gives you only 10% for any land doctrine. Same story with close air support proponent. He's the equivalent of Manstein for air experience, and air warfare theorist is the general one. Ernst Ude dive bomber is the equivalent of Guderian, and for the above two. Alfred Saalwachter gives you a huge bonus for the land doctrine, plus 20%. That is a lot. And Otto Ciliax is just the general naval theorist. So basically, the more expensive guys are more specialized, and they give you a bigger research bonus in a certain field, while the 150 guys are general. You can only hire one at a time, so it's usually going to be the land guy. Then there's the military staff, where you can again stack bonuses on top of your units. Chief of Army, Chief of Navy, Chief of Air Force, and then the military high command, which is you get to select 3 of these guys to fill out these 3 positions. As a rule, these guys can be a specialist, an expert, or a genius. The specialist gives much smaller bonuses than the expert, and the expert gives much smaller bonuses than the genius. It doesn't really matter. It could be seen as a strategy to try to stack up as many geniuses as possible. I think we have here here's the genius, and to sort of tailor your army in order to better benefit from these genius bonuses. Like in our case, Erwin Rommel gives an armored division attack and armored division defense plus 15%. That's a hell of a lot of bonus. If you look at an expert infantry, it gives you only 10% attack bonus and 15% defense bonus. So an extra 5% attack is not it's not something to derive. Focuses. If you click here, you have the national focus and the focus tree. This is pretty big, and I hear in the next patch you're going to be able to zoom out in order to see it completely. But right now we can just, in this particular version, we just drag around. So this is something to do with your political power. You consume your political power. So by taking one of these focuses, you will consume 1 political power per day. So when you see their political power change 2.43, you will only have 1.43. Is it 43? Yeah, it's sitting a bit far from the monitor. So once you select the focus, you will consume one political power per day. And at the end of 70 days, you'll see completion time, 70 days, you will attain these particular bonuses. In this case, 2% research bonus for industry, blah, blah. One of these that I was telling you about earlier is the Rhineland focus, which gives you some army experience and increases world tension. World tension is responsible for increasing war support. The higher the world tension, I think I mentioned world tension before. So world tension is originally at 0%. Now, through actions such as through aggressive military actions such as remilitarizing the Rhineland and so on, you can spike the world tension. You might want to do that, or you might not want to do that. The point, as Germany, you want to create as little world tension as possible, but as much world tension as possible, if you can balance them out. Why? Because Britain, for instance, has some of their focuses locked behind world tension. So if they have more than 5% world tension, or they are at war, they can take this focus. But as long as world tension is less than 5%, they cannot take this focus, which means they will be that much further from gaining a research slot and some industry bonuses and some military factories and some more military factories down here and so on. So it will take them, by the way, this one, they need to have 20% world tension. So even if they can get down here, they can't get this one unless there's 20% world tension. General rearmament, which gives them a national spirit that reduces their consumer factories, is locked behind 10% world tension. Another country that is also limited by world tension, and in a very important way, is the United States. The United States cannot take limited intervention unless it has a certain amount of support. This one used to be this one used to be hidden behind world tension, I guess no longer. And everything seems to have been modified into war support. But war support is dependent on the world tension. So the more world tension increases, war support increases. So basically, they might not be able to take this one or this one if they don't have more than 30% war support. And the way they get war support is if you go out and do and create world tension. So this is a more indirect way. It used to be more directly modeled on world tension in the past, but I suppose that's not the case anymore. Yeah, so it's just Britain that's remained directly connected to world tension for being locked out of their focus tree. So it's important. Why is it important? Because, like, you can, for instance, there are some focuses here. Now, at the very end, you get the war goals, right? So the country will go through their focus tree 70 days at a time or 35 days at a time from time to time. Here you have an exclusive choice. This thing is meant to indicate an exclusive choice, while this dotted line means one or the other. And but if you get two lines that go into a certain icon, it means both things need to be both focuses need to be completed. So for instance, here we go, and all the focuses sort of tend to be a small, sort of tend to be broken up into a small industrial part, a small air part, a small army part, and a small the war goals and war focuses and so on. And there's also a small naval part. So sometimes they're interconnected and so on, right? So let's look at our expansionary political focus. You get to do Rhineland, then Anschluss. You need to have a certain manpower in the field. So it's good to hover over them because it tells you need to have a certain amount of manpower in the field. Then to Sudetenland, you need to have even more manpower in the field. To reassert eastern claims, it doesn't matter. All you have to do is to have completed the Anschluss, right? Vienna word starts to give some territory around, and you also get a MIFO bill cost reduction. You also manage to create world tension with it. You can deal with Poland in one of two ways, either Danzig or war, which means you go to war with Poland, or you give them, you propose to give them Danzig for Slovakia, which will be a puppet of yours after this, or an integrated thing. You can do both here. And Poland can either accept your offer or not. So they can give you Danzig peacefully, which means you can avoid war, you can befriend Poland, which will turn them into a fascist regime, and you can directly focus on attacking in the west by going around the Maginot and then doing war with France. You have the option of Operation Tannenbaum, which is attacking Switzerland, something that never happened in the actual war. And assuming you have control of Alsace, Lorraine, and Luxembourg, you can reintegrate them. Here you have the options to align with Italy, Spain, Turkey. After you go to war with the Soviet Union, you have the Anti-Comintern Pact, Anti-Soviet Pact, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. You can even go with allies. You can even ally the USSR, which is another dark horse scenario, so to speak. Out of Danzig or war, you can also do Operation Weserüberung, which was the German invasion of the Scandinavian land. As you can see, Germany does not have a direct war goal against the UK, but the UK being the head of the Allies, and all of these war goals will ensure that you will go to war with the UK in the end. So, having said that, let's pick a focus, do the Rhineland. You can cancel the focus. For the first 10 days, you cancel the focus for free. You get 10 political power back. If it's more than 10 days that have passed since you get the focus, you will get only 10 political power back, and everything else that you've spent is gone. So you've wasted political power. So we are doing the Rhineland. Now, before we get to the actual armies and how we move them around the tree, we've talked about all that. Oh yeah, also the effect of taking the focus. You see here now the Rhineland costs 1, so you will only make 1.43 per day. Germany is a very gifted nation in terms of political power generation because of the capacities of their leader. That gives you a boost to political power, which is why I personally recommend doing Germany as the first one. So, before we get into the army, let's talk about the overall arching strategies for winning this game. There are 3 main ways in which you can win the war. I'm thinking maybe we should talk research first, but no. Let's talk about this and then we go to research because it has a nice segue into it. So there are 3 ways in which you can win the war. Now, obviously, before we talk about that, there are 3 components of the war which we can regard them as different ones. You have the land war, the air war, and the naval war. We're going to discuss for now the land war in essence. The naval war and the air war only become relevant when you want to take out the United Kingdom or the United States, only when you have to basically get on a boat. The air war is more or less relevant all the time, but it takes a secondary role. We'll discuss this at a later date. So, how do you win the war? You have three big ways of winning the war. Way number one, you win the war through a technological advantage. Basically, you have research bonuses that allow you to go into the future and come back with a variant of your equipment. In this case, let's say tanks, because tanks generally win the war. So you can go and see, it says here, it reduces ahead of time penalty by 2 years and gives a 100% research bonus valid for the next researchers of the technologies. And you have Panzerkampfwagen 3, and it also gives you another 100% research bonus for armored technology. Basically, the way you win the war, but this one will not win you the war, but it will give you a very solid advantage early on. It'll give you a 2 years jump on armored technology versus the rest of the world, which is in essence what Germany had at the beginning of the war. Unfortunately, everyone else caught up. So option number one is you get the better technology, you reach into the future, you get the better technology, you produce it sooner, and you get the advantage that way. This is a way to win the war quickly. Eventually, the rest of the world will catch up, so you need to pay attention to keep pushing ahead if you want to keep doing this, if you want to keep using this way of winning the war. So you get better fighters, you get better guns, you get better armor, and you deploy it sooner than everyone else, thus giving you an advantage, and that's how you win the war quickly. You need to do it quickly. Option number two of winning the war. You outproduce your opponent in every type of equipment there is, and in every type of, and assuming you can sustain the manpower losses. So this type of winning the war is much more how do I put it? Is much more adapted to winning the naval war and winning the air war, because you are only dependent on your production with a minor manpower component in it. So the countries that are very prone to using this strategy for winning the war are the United States of America, and Germany can get here if they manage to capitulate the Soviet Union. So basically, the USA and Germany can use this version for winning the war, which is to outproduce everyone else on who is opposed to them, basically by building up a very strong industrial base, which the US already has. They have a very weak very weak military industrial base, but a very, very strong civilian base, which is locked off in consumer goods factories, but will become available as soon as they start mobilizing for war. So the US has a capacity to steamroll, to outproduce all of its opponents, which is in fact what happened in the war itself. Basically, everyone says that the German tanks in the end of the war were superior in every which way to the American Shermans, except for numbers. Basically, they just outnumbered the Americans. Were just capable of replacing their Shermans faster than the Germans were capable of destroying them. So that's one way of winning the war. So way number one, technological advantage. Way number two, production advantage. Way number three is a war of attrition. Basically, you want to be in the position of inflicting casualties to your enemy while not taking any casualties yourself, and literally bleeding them dry out of manpower, bleeding them dry out of equipment. Once they are in a certain weakened state, which you can find easily by looking at them, you will be able to push unopposed with whatever army you've managed to accumulate in this entire time. This is the way to win the war when you are a minor nation, or when you are a major but you are going up against a much more powerful alliance. So, for instance, let's say you're Germany and you're going up against a very good USSR. Technically, you would lose that because the USSR could theoretically get the advantage out of it. So originally, the advantage will be in Germany's hands because Germany tends to go for the technological advantage, but they will not be able to plow through all of the manpower and the reserves and everything that the USSR has. And if they have the time to get their industry up and rolling, then eventually they will just end up steamrolling the Germans. But what happens against the AI, for instance, is that the USSR starts out with a tremendous amount of manpower, right? Which it's true they have, and they relentlessly attack the Germans with that manpower. So basically, if you can churn through all the manpower of Germany, if you can churn through all the manpower of the USSR, you can get past it. Now, the trick to this third way of winning the war is you need to take very little casualties while inflicting a lot of casualties. How do you achieve that? There are two ways. One is you need to build defense-heavy divisions, right, that take very little cash. So basically, you need to have a lot of infantry with a lot of bonuses to defense, so that they do not take actual damage when they fight, and whatever damage they do deal will be enough to inflict casualties on the other side. A second way of achieving that is something called the heavy tank infantry strategy, and we're going to discuss that at a later date. But all I'm saying is, by blending in a heavy tank with an infantry battalion, you are giving the entire infantry armor protection to the point where their defense is effectively increased to where they're not taking any actual casualty. This is a viable strategy if you're playing France against the AI, not against a human player. But if you're playing France against the AI, you build heavy infantry, and this is a good strategy for every minor nation in order to win. In order to bleed their opponents dry, you build heavy infantry, which means infantry with heavy tank support. The AI is not capable of breaking it. Basically, you will constantly inflict enough casualties, and if you can manage to produce enough heavy tanks to where your infantry divisions will not lose the heavy tank support, you can get away with winning the war this way. It's a viable strategy for minor nations that have access to heavy tanks, that have access to a little bit of chromium or can afford to trade for chromium. So basically, if we look around the world, France, you don't see a lot of chromium, but actually, and this is where you need to be a bit of a veteran of the game, France has Chromium fucking Island, which is New Caledonia, which has like almost a quarter of all the chromium in the game. Granted, it's all the way out here and it's exposed, and if Japan ends up in the war against France, they're going to take it. But from the very beginning, France has access to a lot of chromium, and let's assume that they lose Chromium Island. As long as France proper doesn't fall, being supported by this heavy tank infantry, they can trade with South Africa, which has a lot of chromium, and Britain, the UK, which also have a lot of chromium. So they can sustain their heavy tank production even if they lose access to the chromium. Turkey is another chromium heavy country. The same goes for Yugoslavia, who has a lot of chromium available in northern Macedonia. The USSR has a bunch of chromium spread out, so doing heavy tank infantry for the USSR is also a valid strategy. And especially against the Germany, who will probably come at you with medium tanks, and they won't be able to pierce your heavy tank infantry, or your heavy tank infantry will be able to pierce their light tanks. So it's a valid strategy for winning the war. So, like I said, there are 3 basic strategies for winning the war. One of them has to do with researching more advanced technology, deploying that advanced technology, and enjoying the advantages of the advanced technology. This is a good short-term power boost, but it will not be maintainable for the future. The second one is by outproducing your opponent. This especially applies to the air game and the naval game, but it can also apply to the ground game. So basically, if you can afford to produce heavy tanks instead of medium tanks, so if you have the resources and you have the factories available and you can build up your economy, then almost nothing beats heavy tanks, except terrain. But if you're fighting Germany, you're not fighting terrain too much, and there are ways to reduce terrain modifiers too. So and the third one is bleeding your opponent dry behind some very thick defensive infantry, or defensive infantry which is lighter but it has heavy tank support. I'm going to pause the recording right here. I'm actually going to outright stop it, and I'm going to come back to it at a later date and go into army composition.